Sometimes the most profound connections are born from shared suffering. In a world that has forgotten the meaning of compassion, one man's simple act of kindness will change everything. An Apache warrior named Kiona finds a dying wolf chained in the desert, abandoned by settlers who used it for a cruel sport. Both are outcasts in a harsh land that wants them gone. "You need rescue, and I need a companion," Kiona says as he breaks the chains. What starts as mercy becomes brotherhood. Together they face the men who hunt them and the wilderness that tests them. Their bond grows stronger with each passing day, proving that sometimes the family you choose matters more than the one you're born into. But this unlikely friendship will spark something bigger than either of them imagined. Can a warrior and a wolf survive when the whole frontier stands against them? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Arizona desert stretched endlessly under a merciless sun, its red earth cracked like ancient scars. Kiona moved through this wasteland with the fluid grace of his ancestors, each step deliberate and silent. The Apache warrior had learned to read the desert's moods as others read books. Every shifted stone, every bent blade of grass told a story of who had passed, and when at 42, Kiona carried the weight of a dying world on his shoulders. His weathered face bore the lines of too many losses, too many farewells. The sacred medicine pouch at his side contained herbs and totems passed down through generations of Apache healers, each item a connection to traditions that fewer and fewer remembered. His grandfather's teachings echoed in his mind like distant thunder. "The earth speaks to those who listen, my grandson. But first, you must learn to be still." The morning air held the promise of another scorching day. Kiona paused beside a cluster of barrel cacti, their spines catching the early light. Like tiny spears, he had been tracking a small herd of javelina since dawn, but something else had caught his attention, a scent that didn't belong in this sacred landscape. Metal, rust, and beneath it all, the unmistakable smell of suffering. His people had once, numbered in the thousands, warriors and hunters who knew every canyon and mesa for hundreds of miles. Now, Kiona walked alone. The cavalry raids had scattered the Apache like seeds on barren ground. Some had died fighting. Others had been herded onto reservations where their spirits withered like plants without sun. A few, like Kiona, had chosen the harder path survival in a world that no longer wanted them to exist. He remembered his childhood in the Dragoon Mountains, where his father had taught him the sacred songs, and his mother had shown him which plants could heal and which could kill. Those days seemed like stories from another man's life now. The boy who had laughed while racing horses bareback through mountain meadows had been replaced by a ghost who moved through shadows, living on the edges of a world that was rapidly forgetting the Apache ever existed. The strange scent grew stronger as Kiona approached a natural depression in the desert floor. What he found there would haunt him for the rest of his days, but it would also save him from the slow death of hopelessness that had been eating at his soul like acid. Chained to a rotting fence post, a magnificent gray wolf lay dying in the sun. The animal's coat, once thick and lustrous, was matted with blood and dirt. Its eyes, though dimmed by pain and dehydration, still held a spark of defiance that Kiona recognized in his own reflection. Rusted chain links bound the creature's neck and legs, the metal worn smooth by desperate struggles to break free. The wolf's breathing came in shallow pants. Flies buzzed around infected wounds where the chains had cut deep. Yet when Kiona approached, the animal lifted its head with dignity intact, watching the Apache warrior with intelligent golden eyes that seemed to peer directly into his soul. "Brother," Kiona whispered in Apache, then switched to English. "You need rescue, and I need a companion." The wolf's ears twitched at the sound of his voice. No snarl, no bared teeth, just exhausted acceptance from a fellow creature who understood what it meant to be hunted. Kiona knelt beside the animal, moving slowly to avoid causing alarm. His hands, calloused from years of survival, worked gently at the chains. The logs had long since rusted solid, but his knife was sharp and his patience legendary. As he worked, he spoke in soothing tones, mixing Apache and English the way his grandmother had when telling stories by the fire. Someone hurt you badly, didn't they? Left you here to die slowly, because quick death would have been too merciful. The chains fell away with metallic clinks. They wanted you to suffer. That's what they do to things they don't understand. The wolf made no attempt to move as Kiona examined its injuries. 3 deep gashes across its flanks spoke of knife wounds. The chain marks around its neck were infected and weeping. But it was the look in the animal's eyes that told the real story. This was a creature that had known kindness once and had that trust shattered by human cruelty. From his medicine pouch, Kiona withdrew a leather water skin and a collection of healing herbs his mother had taught him to prepare. The wolf drank greedily, but carefully, as if afraid the water might be snatched away. As Kiona cleaned the wounds with sage-infused water, the animal trembled but didn't pull away. "You're thinking about whether to trust me," Kiona murmured, applying a paste of ground willow bark and desert sage to the infected cuts. "I understand that. Trust is a luxury we can't afford anymore, isn't it?" The healing process took hours. Kiona worked with the patience of a man who had nowhere else to be and nothing more important to do. He had learned long ago that rushing never served anyone well, not in tracking, not in fighting, and certainly not in healing. The desert sun climbed higher, but he barely noticed the heat. For the first time in months, he had a purpose beyond simple survival. As he worked, memories surfaced like bubbles in still water. His father teaching him that all living things deserved respect, even enemies. His mother's gentle hand showing him how to mix healing medicines. The last time he had seen his sister, when the soldiers came and scattered his people like leaves before a winter storm. The wolf's breathing gradually steadied. When Kiona finished treating the wounds, he sat back on his heels and studied his patient. The animal was larger than any wolf he had seen before, with intelligent eyes and a bearing that suggested nobility, even in its weakened state. "You're not entirely wolf, are you?" he said softly. "There's something else in your blood, something older." As if in response, the wolf struggled to its feet. It swayed unsteadily, but remained upright, its gaze never leaving Kiona's face. For a long moment, man and animal regarded each other in the growing heat of the day. Then, with deliberate slowness, the wolf took a single step closer to its rescuer. Kiona smiled, the first genuine smile he had worn in more than a year. "I think we understand each other. You need time to heal, and I need someone who won't judge me for the things I've had to do to survive." He made camp in the shade of nearby rocks, fashioning a simple shelter that would protect them both from the afternoon sun. The wolf, whom he had begun to think of as Maska Apache for strong, lay quietly nearby, accepting small portions of dried meat and water with the dignity of a chief accepting tribute. That first night, as stars emerged in the vast desert sky, Kiona told Maska about his life, about growing up in the old ways, about learning to hunt and track from his father, about the day the cavalry came and everything changed forever. The wolf listened with the attentiveness of a wise counselor, its golden eyes reflecting the firelight. "They call us savages," Kiona said, poking at the small fire with a stick. "But which of us chains a living creature and leaves it to die in the sun? Which of us takes land that was never ours and calls it progress?" Maska's ears pricked forward, and the wolf made a soft sound in its throat. Not quite a whine, not quite a growl. It was the sound of understanding, of shared pain recognized and acknowledged. Over the following days, as Maska's strength slowly returned, Kiona began to see glimpses of the magnificent creature this wolf had been before its capture. Its intelligence was remarkable. It seemed to understand not just Kiona's words, but his intentions, his moods, even his unspoken thoughts. When Kiona hunted small game, Maska would position itself without being asked, helping to drive prey toward the Apache's waiting hands. But it was more than simple cooperation. There was a connection growing between them that transcended the normal bonds between human and animal. They were two survivors who had found in each other something they had thought lost forever: companionship without judgment, loyalty without conditions. By the end of the first week, they had established routines that felt as natural as breathing. Maska would scout ahead, while Kiona broke camp, alert for dangers that might threaten them both. They shared water and food with the understanding that survival was a joint effort. When Kiona played his father's wooden flute in the evenings, Maska would rest its great head uncrossed, pause and listen with the contentment of a creature finally at peace. The desert no longer seemed quite so empty or hostile. With Maska at his side, Kiona felt connected to something larger than his own solitary existence. They were becoming more than just allies. They were becoming family. The brass cavalry button gleamed dully in the morning light, half buried in the sand where Maska had been chained. Kiona turned the small piece of metal over in his palm, studying the embossed eagle and the numbers that identified its unit. He had seen this design before, during his years as an army scout, and the memory it triggered sent cold dread through his chest. 7th Cavalry, same as Custer's unit. But these men served under a different colonel, now Marcus Whitmore, a man Kiona knew all too well from his days wearing army blue instead of buckskin. Maska, now strong enough to move with something approaching his former grace, sniffed at the button with obvious distaste. The wolf's lips pulled back slightly, revealing white teeth, and a low rumble emanated from his chest. Even without human intelligence, Maska seemed to understand that this small piece of brass represented something dangerous. You remember their scent, don't you, brother? Kiona slipped the button into his medicine pouch. The men who chained you here weren't just random settlers looking for sport. They were soldiers, or at least men working with soldiers. The implications hit him like a physical blow. If Whitmore's men were this far south, it meant the systematic hunting of Apache survivors had begun in earnest. The reservations weren't enough anymore. They wanted every Apache dead or gone, the land completely cleared for white settlement. Kiona had been naive to think he could simply disappear into the desert and live out his days in peace. The world was shrinking, and there was no place left to hide. He spent the morning scouting the area where Maska had been found, reading the signs left in sand and stone. What he discovered confirmed his worst fears. Multiple horses, at least 6 men, all carrying military equipment. They had camped here for several days, using Maska as entertainment while they planned something larger. Boot prints led toward series of mesas to the East Territory that had once been home to the Mescalero Apache band led by Chief Nana. If any of Nana's people still lived free, they were in immediate danger. But it was what Kiona found in a discarded whiskey bottle that truly chilled his blood. A rolled paper, probably dropped by one of Whitmore's men, contained a list of names and locations. Apache names, places where survivors had been spotted. Bounties offered for proof of death. His own name was at the top of the list. $200 for the renegade scout Kiona, dead or alive, he read aloud. Considered extremely dangerous and resourceful, known to be operating alone in the southern Arizona territory. Maska pressed against his side, sensing his distress. The wolf had grown strong in the weeks since his rescue, his coat now glossy and thick, his movements fluid with recovered power. But more than physical strength, Maska had developed an almost supernatural awareness of Kiona's emotional state. They had become so attuned to each other that sometimes Kiona wondered where he ended and the wolf began. They're not just hunting Apache anymore, Kiona told his companion, scratching behind the wolf's ears. They're hunting anyone who refuses to disappear quietly. And now they know I'm out here. The decision, when it came, felt inevitable. They could run deeper into the desert, try to find some corner of the world where the cavalry couldn't follow. But running would mean abandoning any other Apache survivors to Whitmore's hunters. It would mean accepting that his people's presence on this land was truly finished, or they could fight. What do you think, Maska? Kiona asked, studying the wolves. Intelligent golden eyes. Are you ready to remind these men what it means to hunt Apache? Maska's response was to lift his head and release a howl that echoed off the distant mesas, a sound both mournful and defiant, like the voice of the desert itself crying out against injustice. That night, Kiona performed the ritual his grandfather had taught him for asking guidance from the spirits. He built a small fire of sacred wood, burned offerings of sage and sweetgrass, and opened his heart to whatever wisdom the ancestors might provide in the flickering flames. He saw images that might have been memories or might have been prophecy. Apache warriors riding alongside wolves, the two species united in their respect for the land and each other. His grandfather's face, stern but loving, speaking words that Kiona felt rather than heard. Sometimes, grandson, the spirits choose unusual messengers for their most important work. When the fire died down to glowing coals, Kiona's path was clear. He and Maska would become something new, not just man and wolf surviving together, but partners in a fight to preserve what was sacred in a world intent on destroying it. Colonel Marcus Whitmore was leading the destruction of Kiona's people. Therefore, Whitmore would have to be stopped. Tomorrow we begin, Kiona told Maska, who watched him with eyes that seemed to glow with their own inner fire. They want to hunt us? Let them learn what it means to become the prey. The hand-carved flute had belonged to Kiona's father, and before him, to his father's father. Made from the hollow bone of a crane, it produced haunting melodies that could carry for miles across the desert landscape. Now, as Kiona played softly in the pre-dawn darkness, the instrument served a different purpose, teaching Maska the subtle musical signals that would coordinate their movements during the dangerous work ahead. 3 short, low notes meant danger. Approaches. A rising trill indicated circle left. A series of rapid high notes commanded attack. Maska learned with the quick intelligence that Kiona had come to expect from his unusual companion. The wolf's ears would perk at each musical phrase, his body tensing into the appropriate response position. You understand more than most humans, Kiona murmured, lowering the flute. Sometimes I think you were sent to me by the spirits themselves. They had been practicing their partnership for 2 weeks now, ever since discovering the cavalry button and realizing they were being actively hunted. What had started as simple survival training had evolved into something far more sophisticated, a level of tactical coordination that would have been impossible between human partners, let alone man and animal. Their first real test came at dawn. Maska's nose twitched, and he looked toward the eastern ridge with focused attention. Kiona immediately went still, trusting his companion's superior senses. Sure enough, within minutes, he could hear what the wolf had detected long before, the sound of approaching horses. 3 riders topped the rise, moving with the casual confidence of men who believed themselves the apex predators in this landscape. Kiona recognized the type immediately. Whitmore's scouts, hardened men who had made careers out of hunting Apache and collecting the bounties offered for proof of their deaths. The lead rider was a thin man with pale eyes and a scraggly beard. His companions looked equally disreputable, the kind of men who would chain a wolf to a post and call it entertainment. All 3 carried military-issue rifles and wore cavalry boots, but their clothes were civilian. Whitmore's private army of Indian hunters. Kiona gave the signal for circle left on his flute. The melody was so soft it barely disturbed the morning air, But Maska responded instantly, melting into the landscape with the fluid grace of his kind. Within seconds, the wolf had become invisible among the rocks and desert scrub. The scouts rode closer, studying the ground for tracks. They had found Kiona's trail from the previous day and were following it, with the dogged persistence of professional manhunters. "Trail's getting fresher," the lead scout announced. "That Apache's gotta be close." $200, the second man said greedily. "That's more than I made in 6 months of regular soldiering." "Assuming we can find him," the third scout replied. "These Apache know how to disappear like smoke when they want to." They were passing directly below Kiona's position when he played the attack sequence on his flute. To the scouts, it probably sounded like a bird call, if they noticed it at all. But Maska heard it clearly and responded with devastating efficiency. The wolf exploded from concealment like a gray thunderbolt, hitting the lead scout's horse in the shoulder with enough force to send both animal and rider tumbling to the ground. Before the other two men could react, Kiona was among them, moving with the fluid deadliness his grandfather had trained into his muscles and bones. His knife took the second scout in the chest before the man could draw his weapon. The third scout managed to fire one wild shot that went nowhere near its target before Kiona's war club caved in his skull. The lead scout, thrown clear when his horse fell, scrambled for his rifle. Maska got there first, powerful jaws clamping down on the man's wrist with enough pressure to snap bones. The scout's scream echoed off the canyon walls like the cry of a dying animal. "Please," the scout gasped, staring up at Kiona with eyes wide with terror. "I got family. I was just following orders." Kiona studied the man's face, memorizing every feature. This was one of the hunters who had chained Maska to die slowly in the sun. One of the men who collected Apache scalps like trophies and called it civilization. "Did the wolf have family too?" Kiona asked quietly. "Did the Apache children on your bounty list have families?" The scout's answer was a whimper. Kiona's knife ended his suffering quickly, more mercy than the man deserved. But Apache warriors were taught that unnecessary cruelty diminished the one who practiced at dawn as Maska fed on the scout horses. Kiona searched the dead men's belongings. He found maps marking Apache camps, lists of survivors with bounties attached, and most valuable of all, a letter from Colonel Whitmore outlining his plans for the final extermination of free Apache in the territory. Operation Desert Sweep. Kiona read aloud. Systematic elimination of all hostiles south of the Gila River. Estimated timeline, 6 months. Expected resistance, minimal. He looked at Maska, who was cleaning his muzzle with the satisfied expression of a predator who had fed well. "They think we'll be easy prey, brother. Perhaps it's time to show them how wrong they are." That night, they made camp in a hidden canyon that Kiona remembered from his youth. As he prepared a small fire and cleaned his weapons, he found his thoughts turning to a memory from long ago. Conversation with his father about the sacred bond between Apache and wolves. Long before the white man came, his father had said, "Our people and the wolf people were allies. We hunted together, shared territory, raised our young side by side. The wolves taught us patience and coordination. We taught them about the spirits that move in all living things." Young Kiona had listened with the fascination of a child hearing ancient wisdom. What happened to the Alliance, father? The same thing that happens to all sacred things when men forget their place in the world, his father had replied sadly. It was broken by those who saw wildness as something to be conquered rather than respected. Now, 30 years later, Kiona understood that he and Maska were rebuilding that ancient alliance. They were proving that the bond between Apache and wolf could still be forged, could still serve as a force for protecting what was sacred in the world. The flute sang softly in the desert night, its voice carrying melodies that spoke of friendship across species, of loyalty that transcended the boundaries human beings drew between themselves and the natural world. And somewhere in that music, Kiona heard the whisper of his ancestors' approval. The broken wagon wheel told a story that made even Maska whine with distress. Kiona knelt beside the splintered wood, reading the tragedy written in scattered belongings and dried bloodstains. This had been an Apache family, parents, grandparents, children attempting to flee the systematic hunting that had consumed their homeland. They hadn't made it 50 yards from their overturned wagon before Whitmore's men had cut them down. Kiona's hands trembled as he gathered the scattered remains of lives cut short. A child's moccasin, no bigger than his palm. A woman's weaving, half finished, the bright threads now faded by sun and rain. An old man's walking stick, carved with symbols that told the story of a long life lived in harmony with the desert. 7 people had died here. 7 Apache souls who would never see another sunrise, never share another meal, never pass their knowledge to the next generation. The youngest victim couldn't have been more than 5 years old. Maska pressed against his side, offering the comfort of warm fur and shared grief. The wolf had been studying the massacre site with his own keen senses, and his agitation suggested he understood the full horror of what had happened here. "This is what Whitmore calls progress," Kiona said, his voice rough with suppressed rage. "This is the civilization he's bringing to our lands." The Apache way required him to sing the death songs and perform burial rites for the slain. But first, he needed to understand exactly how they had died. The sign was clear enough for someone trained to read the desert's secrets. The family had been traveling at night, probably trying to reach the relative safety of Mexico. Whitmore's scouts had spotted their campfire and surrounded them in the pre-dawn. Darkness. What followed had not been a battle. It had been a slaughter. The men had died fighting, trying to protect their loved ones. The women and children had been killed last, probably after witnessing the deaths of their protectors. The precision of the attack spoke of professional soldiers led by someone who understood Apache tactics intimately. Someone like Marcus Whitmore, who had once fought alongside Apache scouts and learned their ways from the inside. As Kiona prepared the bodies for burial, according to Apache tradition, he spoke to them in the old language, promising that their deaths would not go unavenged. Maska helped by digging, his powerful claws making quick work of the hard desert earth. The burial ceremony took most of the day. Each body had to be wrapped properly, oriented toward the sacred directions, accompanied by personal items that would serve them in the spirit world. Kiona sang the ancient songs his grandfather had taught him, his voice carrying across the empty landscape like a prayer for justice. When the last stone was placed on the final grave, both man and wolf sat in silent contemplation as the sun set behind distant mountains. The desert felt heavier somehow, weighted with the grief of lives stolen too early. It was then that Maska alerted to approaching danger. His ears perked forward, his body tensing into hunting position as he caught a scent that didn't belong. Someone was coming from the east, moving carefully, but not quietly enough to fool a wolf's senses. Kiona readied his weapons, expecting another patrol of Whitmore's hunters. Instead, a single figure emerged from behind a cluster of boulders, a white woman in a torn calico dress, moving with the desperate urgency of someone fleeing for her life. She stumbled into the clearing where the massacre had taken place, saw Kiona and Maska, and froze like a deer caught in torchlight. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the woman's legs gave out, and she collapsed to her knees in exhaustion. "Please," she gasped. "Don't kill me. I'm trying to help." Kiona studied her carefully. She was perhaps 30 years old, with brown hair and intelligent eyes. Her dress was expensive but travel-worn, and she carried a small bundle that suggested hasty flight. Most telling of all, she showed no fear of Maska despite the wolf's intimidating presence. "Who are you running from?" Kiona asked in English. "My husband," she replied, and there was a world of pain in those 2 words. My husband and his men. They did this, didn't they? She gestured toward the fresh graves. What makes you think so? Because I've seen them do it before. Tears started down her cheeks. I thought I could change him, so I could make him see reason. But he's gone mad with hate, and now he plans to poison the water sources to drive out any survivors. Kiona's blood went cold. Poisoning water sources was not just warfare, it was genocide, an attack on the very foundation of life in the desert. Why should I trust you? He asked. The woman reached into her bundle and withdrew a leather pouch filled with medical supplies. Because I've been following his patrols, trying to warn Apache families before they could be found. Because I've been leaving medicine and food where survivors might find them. Because I can't live with the knowledge of what he's doing in the name of civilization. She looked directly at Kiona with eyes that held genuine remorse. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I know who you are, Kiona, the Apache scout who turned against the army. My husband has wanted to kill you for years. Your husband? Tom Mitchell? He rides with Colonel Whitmore's hunters. She paused, studying Kiona's reaction. But Tom isn't the real problem. Whitmore is. He's planning something called Operation Desert Sweep, and it's going to kill every Apache between here and Mexico. Masca had been listening to this conversation with the attention he usually reserved for tracking prey. Now the wolf moved closer to Sarah, sniffing carefully at her clothes and belongings. After a moment, he relaxed. Slightly his animal instincts apparently deciding she posed no immediate threat. You said they plan to poison water sources, Kiona said. Where? The natural springs in Devil's Canyon. It's where most of the remaining Apache families get their water during dry season. Whitmore's men will arrive there in 3 days with enough arsenic to kill everything that drinks there for the next year. Devil's Canyon. Kiona knew it well, a sacred place where Apache had held ceremonies for generations, where the water ran pure and sweet, even in the driest summers. If Whitmore poisoned it, he would destroy not just Apache lives, but the very heart of Apache's spiritual connection to the land. Why are you telling me this? Kiona asked, thought Sarah Mitchell looked at the fresh graves, then back at him. Because I helped create this monster, and now it's my responsibility to help stop it. Because those children didn't deserve to die for the crime of being born Apache. Because if we don't stop Whitmore now, he'll keep killing until there's nothing left but graves and guilt. That night, as they made camp in a hidden alcove, Kiona found himself reassessing everything he thought he knew about the white settlers. Sarah Mitchell might be the exception that proved the rule, but she was still an exception proof that not all of Whitmore's people supported his genocidal campaign. It gave him hope, and hope was something he hadn't felt in a long time. The silver compass had been Marcus Whitmore's prized possession for 15 years. A gift from his commanding officer after a particularly successful campaign against the Sioux. Now it lay in Kiona's palm, its polished surface reflecting firelight, as he studied the inscription on the back. To Colonel Whitmore for distinguished service in the cause of civilization. Masca had taken it during their raid on Whitmore's supply camp, slipping through the shadows like a gray ghost, while Kiona created a distraction on the opposite side of the camp. The wolf's ability to move unseen and strike without warning had proven invaluable in their guerrilla campaign against the Colonel's hunters. Over the past month, they had struck 6 times. Supply wagons burned, ammunition destroyed, horses scattered, and men left afoot in the desert with just enough water to reach the nearest army post. Each attack was precisely planned and flawlessly executed, demonstrating a level of tactical coordination that was becoming legendary among both Apache and white settlers. The Ghost Warrior and his Devil Wolf, that's what Whitmore's men were calling them now. Stories spread from camp to camp, growing in the telling until Kiona and Masca had become figures of myth rather than mere flesh and blood. Sarah had proven invaluable in these operations, using her position as a settler's wife to gather intelligence and pass warnings to Apache families. Her husband Tom had grown suspicious, but so far she had managed to deflect his questions while providing crucial information about patrol schedules and supply routes. The compass represented more than just successful theft. It was psychological warfare of the highest order. Whitmore would know that his personal tent had been penetrated, his most prized possession taken while he slept mere yards away. The message was clear. Nowhere was safe from the partnership of Apache warrior and spirit wolf, but their success had come at a cost. Whitmore had responded by increasing patrols and bringing in professional trackers from as far away as Texas. The net was tightening, and Kiona knew it was only a matter of time before their luck ran out. "We need to change tactics," he told Sarah as they met at a hidden spring deep in the Dragoon Mountains. "Hit-and-run raids aren't going to stop Operation Desert Sweep. We need to strike at Whitmore himself." Sarah nodded grimly. "He's planning to move the poison operation up by a week. The arsenic shipment arrived yesterday, and his men are already preparing to march on Devil's Canyon." Maska lifted his head from where he had been drinking, water dripping from his muzzle as he studied the surrounding terrain. The wolf had grown, even larger over the past months, his muscles developing the powerful definition of a predator in his prime. More importantly, his supernatural awareness seemed to be increasing. Sometimes Kiona caught him staring at empty air as if seeing things invisible to human eyes. "There's something else," Sarah continued. "Other Apache have been asking about you. Word is spreading that the ghost warrior is real, that someone is finally fighting back against Whitmore's hunters." This was what Kiona had been dreading. His plan had been to remain invisible, to strike without being identified, to protect Apache families without becoming a symbol that might inspire hopeless resistance. "How many?" he asked. 12 so far. Survivors from 3 different bands, including 2 of Chief Nana's warriors who escaped the massacre at Tres Castillos. They want to join you, to learn how you coordinate with the wolf, to become part of something larger. Kiona closed his eyes, feeling the weight of leadership settling on his shoulders like a heavy blanket. He had never wanted to become a war chief, never wanted the responsibility for other lives that came with commanding warriors in battle. But looking at Maska's intelligent eyes and Sarah's hopeful face, he realized that choice had been taken from him. The spirits had set him on this path, and now he had to follow it wherever it led. "Bring them here tomorrow night," he said finally. "We'll see if they're truly ready for the kind of war we're fighting." The gathering took place in a sacred cave that had once been used for Apache coming-of-age ceremonies. 12 warriors, ranging in age from barely 20 to nearly 60, sat in a circle around a small fire while Kiona explained what would be required of them. "This is not the old way of fighting," he warned. "We cannot meet Whitmore's army in open battle and hope to win. We must become like Maska invisible when we need to be, striking without warning, disappearing before our enemies can retaliate." The oldest warrior, a scarred veteran named Chato, who had fought alongside Geronimo, spoke for the group. "We understand guerrilla warfare, Kiona. What we don't understand is how you coordinate with the wolf. How do you think together, move together, strike together?" Kiona looked at Maska, who had positioned himself at the cave entrance where he could watch for approaching danger. The wolf's golden eyes seemed to glow in the firelight, and there was an otherworldly quality to his bearing that made even hardened warriors speak in hushed tones. "Maska is more than a wolf," Kiona said simply. "He carries the blood of the spirit wolves that once served our ancestors. The bond we share is sacred, older than the memory of the oldest among us." He demonstrated by playing a few notes on his father's flute. Maska's ears pricked forward, and without hesitation, the wolf moved to a specific position that would give him a clear view of 3 different approach routes to the cave. "We don't just fight together," Kiona continued. "We think." Together, feel together. Become one warrior with two bodies. This is what we must teach you. Not just tactics, but unity of spirit. The training began that night and continued for days. Some of the warriors adapted quickly to the new methods, learning to move with the silent patience Maska demonstrated. Others struggled with the concept of becoming invisible, preferring the direct approach of traditional Apache warfare. But all of them understood the stakes. Whitmore's Operation Desert Sweep would begin within days, and if they failed to stop it, the last free Apache would disappear forever. The torn Apache treaty lay spread across Kiona's lap like a map of broken promises. Sarah had discovered it among Whitmore's papers during one of her intelligence-gathering missions, and the sight of it filled Kiona with a rage so pure it burned, like white flame in his chest. Treaty of Bosque Redondo, 1868, he read aloud to the assembled warriors. The United States guarantees the Apache people permanent protection on their ancestral lands in perpetuity. He looked up at the faces around the fire. Perpetuity. That means forever, in case anyone was wondering how long white man's promises last. Chato spat into the fire, sending up a brief hiss of steam. We knew their treaties were lies when we signed them. We signed because the alternative was extermination. And now they're pursuing extermination anyway, said a younger warrior named Joaquin, whose wife and children had died in the massacre at Turkey Creek. At least this way, we die fighting. Kiona studied the faces of his followers. They were good. Men, brave men. But they carried the desperation of people who had lost everything except their lives. That desperation could be a weapon, but it could also be a weakness if it led them to take unnecessary risks. We're not here to die, Kiona said firmly. We're here to live, to ensure that Apache children have a future on Apache land, to prove that some promises cannot be broken by bullets and poison. Maska lifted his head from where he had been resting, his ears swiveling toward the cave entrance. A low growl rumbled in his throat, not the aggressive snarl he used when facing enemies, but the warning sound that meant familiar people approaching. Sarah Mitchell appeared at the cave mouth, moving with the careful precision of someone trying not to startle a group of armed warriors. Her face was pale with exhaustion and fear, and blood stained the sleeve of her dress. Tom knows, she said without preamble. He followed me last night and saw me talking to Joaquin's cousin. He's riding to Whitmore right now with news about your location. The warriors erupted in angry voices, some demanding they killed a woman for leading enemies to their sanctuary, others insisting they flee immediately. Kiona raised his hand for silence, his mind already calculating distances, travel times, possible escape routes. How long do we have? He asked. Maybe 6 hours, Sarah replied. Tom's riding hard, but he has to reach the main camp first then. Whitmore has to organize a force large enough to assault this position. 6 hours. Enough time to evacuate, but not enough to save the supplies and weapons they had been stockpiling for the assault on Devil's Canyon. Everything they had worked for over the past months would be lost. There's something else, Sarah continued. Whitmore isn't just planning to attack this cave. He's moving the poison operation up to tomorrow night. He wants to hit Devil's Canyon, while you're trapped here, unable to interfere. The magnitude of the disaster struck Kiona like a physical blow. Whitmore had outmaneuvered them completely, forcing them to choose between their own survival and the lives of every Apache family that depended on Devil's Canyon for water. It's a trap within a trap, Chato observed grimly. He forces us to reveal ourselves by threatening the water source, then crushes us while we're exposed. Maska stood up and walked to Sarah, sniffing at her injured arm with obvious concern. The Wolf had grown to trust her over the weeks of their alliance, accepting her as part of their extended pack. Now his behavior suggested something beyond. Simple animal instinct, an understanding that her pain was connected to their shared struggle. The Wolf is right, Kiona said. watching Maska's interaction with Sarah. We're all connected in this fight. Sarah's safety, our survival, the Apache. Families who depend on clean water. None of us can succeed unless we all succeed. He stood up and began pacing, his mind working through possibilities and probabilities. The old Kiona, the man who had lived as a solitary survivor, would have chosen flight without hesitation. But that man had died when he freed Maska from his chains. This new Kiona carried responsibilities that extended beyond his own life. Joaquin, take 4 men and begin evacuating our supplies to the backup cave in Skeleton Canyon, he ordered. Move fast, but stay quiet. Chato, I want you to take another 4 and start preparing defensive positions along the approach routes. If Whitmore's men reach this cave, make them pay for every foot of ground. What about you? Chato asked. Kiona looked at Maska, then at Sarah's determined face. The 3 of us are going to Devil's Canyon. If we can't stop the entire poison operation, maybe we can at least delay it long enough for the families to evacuate. 3 against Whitmore's entire force? Joaquin shook his head. That's suicide, not tactics. Maybe, Kiona admitted. But Maska and I have been learning something these past months. We've been discovering what it means to fight with the spirits of our ancestors guiding us. And sometimes, when the cause is just and the need is great, 3 can accomplish what 30 cannot. The warriors exchanged skeptical looks, but they began following his orders. They had learned to trust Kiona's judgment, even when that judgment seemed to defy common sense. As the cave emptied, Sarah bound her wounded arm with strips torn from her dress. Tom will never forgive me for this, she said quietly. Even if we survive, I can never go back to my old life. Then we'll have to build you a new one, Kiona replied. The Apache way teaches that family is defined by loyalty, not blood. You've proven your loyalty, Sarah Mitchell. That makes you one of us now. Maska nuzzled against her hand, offering the comfort that only animals seem capable of providing in moments of profound loss. In the wolf's golden eyes, Sarah saw acceptance, understanding, and something that might have been love. As they prepared to leave for what might be their final mission, Kiona found himself thinking about the torn treaty in his hands. Treaties could be broken, promises could be betrayed, but some bonds, like the one between a warrior and his wolf, or between people who chose to stand together against injustice, those bonds were stronger than paper, stronger than lies, stronger. Even in death. Tomorrow night, they would discover just how strong those bonds truly were. The faded photograph fell from Sarah's trembling hands like a dying leaf, landing face up in the desert sand between them. Even in the dim light of their hidden campfire, Kiona could see the image clearly. 2 young soldiers in crisp uniforms, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera with the easy confidence of men who believed they were fighting for justice. One of those soldiers was Marcus Whitmore, barely 25 and still carrying idealism in his eyes. The other was Kiona himself, wearing army blue instead of buckskin, his hair cut short in military fashion, his face unmarked by the lines that grief and exile had carved into it over the years. I found it in Tom's belongings, Sarah said quietly. He's had it for years, apparently, waiting for the right moment to show it to Whitmore. Maska whined softly, sensing the emotional turmoil radiating from his human companion. The wolf pressed closer to Kiona's side, offering comfort that transcended species boundaries. Fort Apache, 1875, Kiona said, his voice barely above a whisper. The year before everything changed. The memories came flooding back like water through a broken dam. Marcus Whitmore had been his partner during those early days as an Army scout, the white officer who had actually listened to Apache wisdom instead of dismissing it as savage superstition. They had tracked renegades together, shared meals and stories around countless campfires, saved each other's lives more times than either could count. Whitmore had been different than honorable, compassionate, genuinely interested in finding peaceful solutions to the conflicts between white settlers and Apache bands. He had spoken the Apache language with careful respect, had learned their customs, had even participated in purification ceremonies when invited. They'd been brothers. In everything but blood, what happened between you? Sarah asked, studying Kiona's face in the firelight. The Chiricahua Wars happened, Kiona replied, his voice heavy with old pain. Specifically, what happened to Marcus's family during those wars? The story unfolded slowly, painfully, like pulling thorns from an infected wound. In 1876, Whitmore had been promoted and given command of a small cavalry unit tasked with protecting settler families in the disputed territories. His wife Elena and their 2 young children had come west to join him, full of dreams about building a new life on the frontier. Kiona had warned him it wasn't safe, that the fighting was too unpredictable, the hatreds too deep on both sides. But Whitmore had been confident in his ability to maintain peace through understanding and mutual respect. He believed what we all wanted to believe, Kiona continued, that good intentions could overcome centuries of mistrust and bloodshed, that honor and decency were universal languages that everyone could understand. The attack had come at dawn, led by a renegade Apache war chief named Taza, who had rejected all attempts at negotiation. Whitmore's small garrison had been overwhelmed within minutes. By the time reinforcements arrived, the settlement was burning, and 13 people were dead. Elena Whitmore and her children were among them. Marcus found them himself, Kiona said, his voice breaking slightly. His wife had been tortured before they killed her. His children, they were 5 and 7 years old, Sarah, babies, and Taza's warriors had shown them no more mercy than they would have shown enemy soldiers. The tragedy had broken something fundamental in Marcus Whitmore's soul. The man who had once spoken respectfully of Apache wisdom became consumed with hatred for all Apache people. The officer who had sought peaceful solutions began advocating for extermination as the only viable policy. I tried to reach him, Kiona said. Tried to explain that Taza didn't represent all Apache, that his family's death was a tragedy, but not a justification for genocide. Marcus wouldn't listen. He said I had chosen my side, and now he was choosing his. That had been the end of their friendship and the beginning of Kiona's exile from the army, unable to serve under officers who viewed all Apache as enemies to be destroyed. He had resigned his commission and attempted to disappear into the civilian world. But Whitmore had never forgotten him. In his grief-twisted mind, Kiona had become the symbol of Apache betrayal, the scout who had turned against his white brothers to protect the very people who had murdered innocent women and children. So this isn't just about clearing the territory for settlers, Sarah said, understanding dawning in her eyes. This is personal. He's been hunting you specifically, using Operation Desert Sweep as an excuse to settle an old score. Kiona nodded grimly. Every Apache family he's killed, every water source he plans to poison, it's all been leading to this confrontation. He wants me to watch him destroy everything I've tried to protect, and then he wants to kill me himself. The implications were staggering. The systematic campaign against Apache survivors wasn't just military strategy, it was elaborate revenge. A campaign of genocide designed to force one man into a final confrontation with his former friend. There's more, Sarah said reluctantly. She reached into her bundle and withdrew another document, this one bearing official Army letterhead. I found this with the photograph. It's Whitmore's final report on his campaign, written as if the operation had already succeeded. Kiona read the document by firelight, his expression growing darker with each paragraph. According to Whitmore's report, the Apache problem in southern Arizona had been permanently solved through decisive military action and environmental deterrence. All hostile elements had been eliminated or driven into Mexico and the territory. was now safe for unrestricted settlement. The report was dated 3 days in the future. "He's so confident of victory that he's already written his success story," Kiona said. "He's planned every detail of our deaths, cataloged every family he intends to poison, calculated exactly how long it will take to break our resistance." But it was the final paragraph that truly chilled his blood. "Special recognition must be given to my former scout Kiona, whose capture and execution marked the end of organized Apache resistance in the territory. His death serves as proof that even the most skilled and cunning of our enemies cannot ultimately prevail against the righteous cause of American civilization." He's been planning this for 8 years, Kiona realized. Everything, the bounties, the systematic hunting, even finding and torturing Maska, it was all designed to bring me out of hiding for one final battle. Maska's ears suddenly pricked forward, and the wolf rose to his feet with fluid grace. His nose twitched as he tested the night air, and a low growl rumbled in his throat. "Company," Kiona said, immediately alert. But instead of the approaching hoofbeats they expected, a single figure emerged from the darkness on foot. It was an Apache woman, elderly but still strong, carrying a bundle of sage and wearing the traditional dress of a medicine woman. "Grandmother," Kiona said respectfully, recognizing her as one of the healers who had ministered to his people for decades. "I bring a message from the spirit world," she said without preamble. "The ancestors have been watching your struggle, Kiona. They want you to know that this fight was written in the stars long before you and the white officer were born." She approached Maska, who surprisingly allowed her to touch his great head. Her weathered hands moved through his fur with practiced gentleness, and her eyes widened slightly. "This one carries the blood of the first wolves," she said with awe. "The ones who chose to serve the people when the world was young. His spirit remembers the ancient compact between our kinds." She looked directly at Kiona with eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of centuries. "The white officer's hatred has given him strength, but it has also blinded him to the true nature of what he faces. He believes he is fighting one man and one wolf. He does not understand that he is fighting the spirit of the land itself, fighting the bond that connects all living things." "What are you saying, grandmother?" "I am saying that tomorrow's battle will not be won by the strongest or the most clever," she replied. "It will be won by those who remember what it means to be truly alive, truly connected to the sacred world that surrounds us." She pressed a small medicine bundle into his hands. "When the time comes, you will know how to use this. Trust in the bond you share with your wolf brother. Trust in the love that brought you together. And remember that some things are stronger than hatred, stronger even than death." With that, she melted back into the darkness as silently as she had come, leaving behind only the scent of sage smoke and the echo of ancient wisdom. Kiona looked down at the photograph again, seeing it now with new eyes. 2 young men who had believed in justice, who had fought side by side for a cause they thought was righteous. One had been broken by tragedy and consumed by hatred. The other had been tempered by loss and forged into something new. Tomorrow would determine which path led to truth. The eagle feather war bonnet had belonged to Kiona's grandfather, passed down through 5 generations of Apache leaders who had worn it in defense of their people. Now, as dawn approached over Devil's Canyon, Kiona lifted the sacred headdress with trembling hands and placed it carefully on his head. The weight of it seemed to carry the spirits of all those who had worn it. Before him, warriors who had fought Spanish conquistadors, Mexican soldiers, American cavalry, and now the final enemy, a former friend consumed by hatred and grief. Maska sat beside him on the rocky outcrop overlooking the canyon, his golden eyes reflecting the first light of what might be their last day. The wolf had grown quieter over the past few hours, as if he too understood the magnitude of what lay ahead. "I never wanted to be a war chief," Kiona said softly, speaking to the spirits of his ancestors as much as to his companion. "I wanted to live quietly, to preserve what I could of the old ways, to die peacefully in my own time. The wolf made a soft sound in his throat, a rumble that conveyed understanding and acceptance. They had been through too much together for words to be necessary between them. Below in the canyon, the natural springs bubbled up from deep within the earth, creating pools of crystal-clear water that had sustained Apache families for countless generations. Sacred ceremonies had been performed here. Children had taken their first drinks from these pools. Elders had come here to die with dignity, surrounded by the pure water that connected all life. If Whitmore succeeded in poisoning this place, it would be more than environmental destruction. It would be spiritual murder, the death of something sacred that could never be replaced. Sarah emerged from the cave where she had been preparing medical supplies, her face pale but determined. Over the past days, she had transformed from a conflicted settler's wife into something harder, more resolved. The knowledge that her husband was riding with Whitmore's forces had initially broken her heart, but now it had crystallized into cold determination. "The scouts report Whitmore's column is 2 hours out," she said. 43 men, including specialists with the poison and demolition equipment. They are moving in tight formation, expecting resistance. Kiona nodded, his mind automatically calculating odds and possibilities. 43 professional soldiers against 2 Apache warriors, 1 wolf and 1 white woman who had never fired a shot in anger. By any rational measure, it was hopeless. But rational measures had never governed the relationship between Kiona and Maska. Their bond transcended logic, existing in a realm where spirit was more important than flesh, where connection mattered more than numbers. "Chato and the others?" he asked. "Still 3 hours behind us," Sarah replied. "Even if they push their horses to exhaustion, they won't arrive until after the battle is decided." That had been part of Whitmore's strategy, forcing Kiona to act alone by threatening the water source before reinforcements could arrive. The Colonel knew his former friend well enough to predict that Kiona would never allow the canyon to be poisoned, even if it meant certain death. Kiona stood and began the ritual preparations. His grandfather had taught him for facing impossible odds. He painted his face with sacred clay, sang the warrior songs that connected him to the spirits of all Apache who had died defending their homeland, and offered prayers to the 4 directions. Maska watched these preparations with the grave attention of a creature who understood ceremony, who recognized the sacred nature of what was happening. When Kiona finished his prayers, the wolf approached and placed his great head against the warrior's chest, a gesture of absolute trust and loyalty. "We may not survive this," Kiona told him, "but we'll show them what it means to stand for something greater than ourselves." The medicine bundle the old woman had given him felt warm against his chest, pulsing with energy that seemed to synchronize with his heartbeat. He still didn't understand what it contained or how he was supposed to use it, but he trusted that the moment would reveal its purpose. As the sun climbed higher, they could hear the approaching column, the jingle of harnesses, the creak of leather, the low voices of men preparing for battle. Whitmore was making no attempt at stealth. Confident in his overwhelming numerical advantage, Sarah checked her rifle one final time, her hands steady despite the fear in her eyes. "I keep thinking about Elena and the children," she said quietly, "about how grief can twist love into something monstrous. Marcus loved his family so much that their deaths turned him into the very thing he once fought against." "Grief is like fire," Kiona replied, adjusting the war bonnet's feathers. "It can destroy everything it touches, or it can forge something stronger than what existed before. The choice is always ours." They had positioned themselves at the narrowest point of the canyon, where the ancient Apache had once built defensive walls to protect the sacred springs. The stones were crumbling now, worn by decades of weather and neglect, but they still provided some cover for the desperate fight ahead. Maska took his position on a ledge that would allow him to strike from above, his powerful body coiled like a spring waiting for release. The wolf's supernatural awareness was heightened to an almost painful degree. Kiona could feel his companion's tension through their mystical bond. The first riders appeared at the canyon mouth as the sun reached its zenith. Whitmore rode at the head of his column, straight-backed and grim-faced, wearing the same expression of cold determination that Kiona remembered from their final argument 8 years ago. But there was something else in the colonel's bearing. Now a brittleness that spoke of a man who had sacrificed his humanity in pursuit of revenge. The idealistic young officer in the faded photograph was truly dead, replaced by this hollow-eyed hunter who saw only enemies where he had once seen brothers. Kiona! Whitmore's voice echoed off the canyon walls. I know you're here. Come out and face me like the warrior you claim to be. For a moment, Kiona was tempted to respond, to try one final time to reach whatever remained of his former friend's conscience. But he had learned hard lessons about the futility of reasoning with hatred. Instead, he played a soft melody on his father's flute, a signal that sent Masca into position and alerted Sarah to prepare for the opening move of their desperate gambit. I can make this quick, old friend, Whitmore called again. Surrender now, and I'll give you a clean death. Continue this foolishness, and I'll make you watch while I poison every drop of water in this canyon. The colonel's men were spreading out, in classic cavalry formation, preparing to overwhelm the defensive position through sheer weight of numbers. These were experienced Indian fighters, men who had participated in dozens of similar assaults against Apache strongholds, but they had never faced anything like what was about to happen in Devil's Canyon. Kiona touched the medicine bundle against his chest one final time, feeling its warmth pulse through him like a second heartbeat. The spirits of his ancestors seemed to gather around him, their presence as real as the stone beneath his feet. Today we fight not just for ourselves, he whispered to Masca, but for every Apache child who will never taste clean water if we fail. For every sacred place that has been destroyed in the name of progress. For the memory of what this land was before hatred poisoned it. The wolf's response was a howl that seemed to come from the earth itself, a sound so primal and powerful that several of Whitmore's horses shied in terror. It was the voice of the wilderness crying out against its destroyers, the song of all wild things that refused to surrender their freedom. And then the battle began. The obsidian knife had been crafted by Kiona's great-grandfather from volcanic glass, so pure it could cut through bone like water. Now it gleamed in the desert sun as Kiona held it ready, knowing that before this day ended, it would taste blood. Perhaps his own. Whitmore's cavalry charge thundered into the canyon like an avalanche of metal and flesh. 43 armed men on horseback, their rifles glinting in the harsh light, their faces set with the grim determination of soldiers who believed they were ending a war. But Kiona and Masca had learned to fight like spirits, not men. As the first wave of riders approached their position, they simply vanished. Kiona melted into the ancient stone walls like smoke, using handholds carved by his ancestors centuries ago. Masca became a gray shadow flowing between the rocks, visible one moment, and gone the next. Sarah, following their prearranged plan, triggered the avalanche they had carefully prepared on the canyon's eastern slope. Tons of carefully loosened stone crashed down into the narrow passage, blocking the cavalry's retreat and creating chaos among the trapped horses. 3 riders went down immediately, crushed beneath the falling rocks. The others wheeled in confusion, unable to target enemies they couldn't see. Hold formation. Whitmore's voice cut through the dust and noise. They're trying to panic you. Watch the high ground. But the high ground was where Masca struck first. The wolf materialized on a ledge directly above Red Morrison, Whitmore's brutal enforcer. Morrison had time for one startled curse before 180 pounds of supernatural predator slammed into his chest, driving him from his saddle with bone-crushing force. Morrison hit the ground hard, but rolled with the impact, his hand finding the pistol at his belt. He fired twice at the wolf, both shots going wide as Mosca bounded away into the maze of boulders that filled the canyon floor. There, the demon wolf! Morrison screamed, blood streaming from 4 parallel gashes across his face. Kill it. Kill the damned thing. 6 rifles swung toward Mosca's last position, but the wolf was already gone. In his place stood Kiona, the obsidian knife in his hand reflecting sunlight like captured fire. Looking for me, Red? The Apache warrior said calmly. Morrison's eyes widened in recognition and fear. He raised his pistol again, but Kiona was already moving. The obsidian blade took the enforcer in the throat before he could pull the trigger, ending his reign of terror with surgical precision. Sarah's rifle cracked from her hidden position, and another of Whitmore's men toppled from his horse. She had become a competent marksman during their weeks of preparation, though her hand shook as she worked the bolt action for her second shot. Spread out, Whitmore commanded. Use the poison. If we can't take them alive, we'll deny them the water. 2 men dismounted and began unpacking the arsenic containers while their companions provided covering fire. This was what Kiona had feared most, that Whitmore would choose to destroy the springs rather than risk defeat. But Mosca was already in motion, flowing through the rocks like liquid death. The wolf hit the first poison specialist from behind, powerful jaws clamping down on the man's neck with enough force to snap his spine instantly. The second specialist fumbled for his sidearm, but Sarah's rifle spoke again, and he crumpled beside his partner. Impossible, Whitmore breathed, watching his carefully planned operation disintegrate before his eyes. 2 men and an animal can't defeat trained cavalry. That was when Kiona appeared directly in front of him, seeming to materialize from the maze. Very air itself. The war bonnet's eagle feathers rustled in the desert wind, and the sacred paint on his face seemed to glow with inner fire. Hello, Marcus, Kiona said quietly. It's been a long time. Whitmore's military saber gleamed as he drew it from its scabbard, the polished steel reflecting the faces of 2 men who had once been brothers. The weapon had been a gift from his father, carried through a dozen battles, blessed with the blood of enemies and the tears of victories done. Now it would decide which of them would live to see another sunset. You should have stayed hidden, old friend, Whitmore said, his voice carrying a mixture of grief and hatred that made it barely recognizable. You should have let me finish this cleanly. Around them, the battle continued to rage. Mosca had become a force of nature, appearing and disappearing among the rocks, striking with surgical precision before melting back into the shadows. The wolf's supernatural awareness allowed him to anticipate his enemies' movements, turning their superior numbers against them as they fired at phantoms and shot each other in their confusion. Sarah's rifle continued to crack from her concealed position, each shot carefully aimed to protect Apache children who would never know her name. She had found a courage she never knew she possessed, transformed from passive observer to active participant in the fight for justice. But the real battle was here, between 2 men who had shared everything: meals, dangers, dreams of a better world before grief and hatred had driven them apart. Elena would weep to see what you've become, Kiona said, circling slowly as Whitmore raised his saber. She loved your gentleness, Marcus. She used to tell me how proud she was that you solved problems with words instead of bullets. Don't you dare speak her name. Whitmore lunged forward, his blade whistling through the air where Kiona's head had been a moment before. You forfeited the right to speak of my family when you chose to protect the animals who murdered them. Kiona parried with his obsidian knife, the volcanic glass ringing against steel like a bell tolling for the dead. Taz's warriors killed your family, Marcus. Not me. Not the Apache children you've been slaughtering in their memory. Apache, Apache. Whitmore pressed his attack, his saber work displaying the skill of a West Point graduate and veteran. Cavalry officer. Savages who understand only violence, who mistake mercy for weakness. Their weapons met again and again. Stone against steel, past against present. Love transformed into hate battling love that endured despite everything. Around them, Whitmore's remaining men were falling to Maska's supernatural hunting abilities and Sarah's increasingly accurate rifle fire, but neither combatant noticed. They were fighting a war that had begun 8 years ago with the death of innocents, a conflict that could only end when one of them chose mercy over vengeance. "You used to understand," Kiona said, bleeding from a shallow cut on his arm. "You used to know that people are individuals, not races. You used to believe that justice meant protecting the innocent, not slaughtering them." "I used to believe in a lot of things," Whitmore replied, his own face marked by the obsidian blade's kiss. "I used to believe that honor mattered, that good intentions could overcome hatred, that men like you would choose loyalty over blood." The saber came down in an overhead strike that would have split Kiona's skull if it had connected. Instead, the Apache warrior rolled aside, his knife opening a long gash along Whitmore's ribs. Whitmore staggered but didn't fall. Blood soaked through his uniform, but his grip on the saber remained steady. "I'm going to kill you slowly," he gasped. "Just like those Apache animals killed my Elena." That was when Maska struck. The wolf had been circling the duel, protecting Kiona's flanks while allowing the two former friends to settle their personal war. But Whitmore's threat triggered every protective instinct in the spirit wolf's supernatural consciousness. Maska hit Whitmore from the side with the force of a falling boulder, driving the colonel to his knees. The saber flew from his grasp, clattering against the canyon stones. For a moment, the wolf's massive jaws were positioned at Whitmore's throat, one snap away from ending 8 years of hatred. "Maska, no," Kiona commanded. The wolf's golden eyes met his companions, questioning. Every instinct screamed for him to finish the enemy who had threatened his pack leader. But the bond between them transcended instinct, elevating both man and wolf to something greater than their individual natures. Slowly, reluctantly, Maska stepped back. Whitmore remained on his knees, staring up at Kiona with eyes that held more than defeat. They held recognition. For the first time in 8 years, he was seeing his former friend clearly, seeing the man who had chosen mercy, even when vengeance would have been justified. "The medicine bundle," Kiona said suddenly, remembering the old woman's words. He pulled the small leather pouch from beneath his shirt and opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a simple braid of hair, black and blonde intertwined, bound with a piece of Apache beadwork. Elena Whitmore's hair, braided together with that of Kiona's sister, who had died in the same cavalry raid that had scattered his people. "She saved this," Kiona said softly, holding the braid where Whitmore could see it. "Your wife saved this. From the friendship ceremony our women held before the troubles began. She wanted to remember that Apache and white people could be sisters, could be family." Whitmore's face crumpled as 8 years of carefully maintained hatred suddenly collapsed. "Elena," he whispered, reaching out with shaking fingers to touch the intertwined hair. "Oh God, Elena, what have I done? What have I become?" The last of his men had fallen to Maska and Sarah's coordinated assault. The canyon was suddenly quiet except for the eternal bubbling of the sacred springs and the sound of a broken man's tears. "You became what grief made you," Kiona said, extending his hand to help his former friend stand. "But grief doesn't have to be the end of the story, Marcus. Elena wouldn't want her death to create more death. She would want it to create understanding." Whitmore looked at the offered hand for a long moment, then slowly reached out and grasped it. As Kiona helped him to his feet, years of hatred seemed to drain away like poison from a wound. "Can you forgive me?" Whitmore asked, his voice broken. "After everything I've done, all the innocents I've killed in her name, Can there be forgiveness for someone like me? Kiona looked at Maska, who watched the exchange with the wisdom of a creature that understood the sacred nature of redemption. He looked at Sarah, who had risked everything to choose justice over loyalty to her husband's cause. Forgiveness isn't mine to give alone, Kiona said. It belongs to the families you've destroyed, the children you've orphaned, the sacred places you've defiled. But redemption, that's something you can earn, one day at a time, one choice at a time. Whitmore nodded slowly, understanding that forgiveness would be a lifetime's work, not a moment's absolution. The new peace pipe had been carved from sacred cedar by Apache and white hands working together, its bowl inlaid with turquoise that caught the evening light like captured sky. 6 months had passed since the battle at Devil's Canyon, and the pipe represented something that would have seemed impossible during those desperate days: genuine cooperation between peoples who had once been sworn enemies. Kiona sat cross-legged beside the eternal springs, now protected by federal legislation that Whitmore had pushed through Congress using his influence and reputation. The water bubbled as pure and clean as it had for countless generations, its music a reminder that some things were too sacred to be destroyed by human hatred. Maska lay beside him, gray muzzle now touched with silver, his massive frame relaxed. In the contentment of a predator at peace, the wolf had found a mate among the surviving Mexican wolves being reintroduced to the region, a sleek black female who had accepted both Maska and his unusual human companion as part of her new pack. 3 wolf cubs played in the shallows of the spring, their antics watched with amused tolerance by their supernatural father. They carried Maska's intelligence in their golden eyes, along with something else, a wildness that spoke of freedom preserved rather than conquered. Tell us about the time the wolf and the warrior became legends, Grandfather Kiona, said a small voice in Apache. Kiona looked down at the circle of children gathered around the fire, some Apache, some Mexican, some the mixed-blood offspring of settlers who had chosen to stay and learn rather than fear and destroy. Among them sat Elena Martinez, the 7-year-old daughter of one of Whitmore's former soldiers, who had married an Apache woman after seeing the futility of hatred. Legends? Kiona asked with mock seriousness. Who told you Maska and I were legends? Everyone knows, piped up Tommy Morrison, the 6-year-old son of a settler family who had moved to the region specifically to be part of the new cooperative community. My pa says you taught a wolf to fight like a warrior and a warrior to hunt like a wolf. Kiona chuckled, scratching behind Maska's ears. The wolf made a contented rumbling sound, half purr and half growl. What do you think, old friend? Are we legends? Sarah Mitchell now, Sarah Whitmore, having taken her former enemy's name in a gesture of reconciliation that still amazed everyone who knew their story, emerged from the adobe schoolhouse where she had been teaching Apache children to read and write in both English and their native tongue. The children have been pestering Marcus for wolf stories all week, she said, settling beside the fire with a tired but genuine smile. Ever since he started the Apache Cultural Preservation Project, they think every day should include tales of supernatural animals. Marcus Whitmore himself appeared from the direction of the trading post, his hair now completely gray, but his step lighter than it had been in years. The guilt would never fully leave him. He carried the weight of his crimes like a physical burden, but he had channeled that guilt into something constructive, using his military connections and political influence to protect Apache rights and preserve their culture. Cultural preservation, he said, settling beside the fire, requires understanding the stories that shape a people's identity. And this particular story shaped all of us. It was true. The events at Devil's Canyon had rippled outward like stones, thrown into still water, changing lives and perspectives throughout the territory. The surviving Apache had been granted formal recognition of their traditional lands. Whitmore's political connections had resulted in federal protection for sacred sites. Most importantly, The example of enemies becoming allies had inspired others to seek reconciliation instead of revenge. "The story begins," Kiona said, looking into the eager faces around the fire, "with suffering that seemed too great to bear, and a choice between hatred and healing." He told them about finding Maska chained and dying, about the decision to free a creature that had every reason to fear and hate human beings. He spoke of the bond that had formed between them, not the domination of animal by human, but true partnership between equals, who chose to trust despite past betrayals. The children listened with the rapt attention that stories of adventure always commanded, but the adults heard deeper themes. They heard about the choice between vengeance and justice, about the possibility of redemption, even for those who seemed beyond saving, about the sacred connections that linked all living things in an unbreakable web of interdependence. "What happened to the bad soldiers?" young Elena asked when the tale reached its climax. "Some of them died fighting," Kiona replied honestly, "but others lived to make different choices. Your grandfather Whitmore was one of the latter." The children accepted this with the easy pragmatism of youth. In their world, Marcus Whitmore was the kind man who had helped build their school and who told funny stories about his days as a cavalry officer. They had no trouble reconciling that image with the tale of redemption Kiona had just finished telling Dodd. As the fire died down to glowing coals, the families began gathering their children for the walk home. The community they had built was small but growing, a testament to the possibility that people of different backgrounds could choose cooperation over conflict. Maska stretched and yawned, his cubs tumbling over his massive paws in their eagerness for attention. The wolf had aged gracefully, his supernatural abilities undiminished by the passing years, his bond with Kiona stronger than ever. "Do you think they understand?" Whitmore asked quietly as the last of the families disappeared into the desert. "Night, do they really comprehend how close we came to destroying everything sacred in this place?" "They understand what matters," Kiona replied, watching the stars emerge in the vast Arizona sky. "They understand that enemies can become friends, that hatred is a choice rather than an inevitability, but some bonds are strong enough to heal any wound." He looked at his oldest friend, then at his wolf brother, then at the woman who had chosen justice over loyalty and found a new family in the process. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There were always those who preferred the simplicity of hatred to the complexity of understanding, but tonight was for peace. The sacred springs bubbled their eternal song, carrying the story of the warrior and the wolf into the desert darkness, where other lonely souls might hear it and remember that even in the harshest places, love could take root and flourish. Some legends, Kiona reflected, were worth becoming.